There's a word in ancient Greek that no modern language has fully replaced. The word is nostos, and it means homecoming. Not just the physical act of returning, but the hunger for it, the weight of everything that pulls a person back to the specific smell of a specific place, the face of a specific person, the sound of waves breaking against a coastline that belongs to you. Homer built one of the greatest works of world literature around that single word, and the man at the center of it, Odysseus, king of Ithaca, is the reason we still talk about the concept of the journey, the trickster, the reluctant hero, and the long way home, 3,000 years later. But here's what most people don't know. Odysseus isn't just myth. Behind the Cyclops and the Sirens and the 6 years with Calypso, there is a world that archaeology keeps confirming was real. The Mycenaean civilization that produced him, the palace structures, the linear bead tablets, the bronze weapons, the livestock economy, the hierarchy of kings and heroes, was not invented by Homer. It was remembered by him. In June 2025, archaeologists on the island of Ithaca announced the discovery of a sanctuary bearing Odysseus's name, inscribed in stone, Odysseus. A Mycenaean cistern from the 14th to 13th century BCE votive offerings, a small bronze bust of the hero himself. Pilgrims had been coming to honor him for over 1,000 years. So who was the man behind the legend? What did his actual world look like? His palace, his ships, his choices, his values? 3,000 years ago. That's what this video is about. Subscribe now, hit the bell, or drop a like. And let's go back to a world where cleverness mattered more than strength, and the word for home was worth 10 years of wandering to find. Odysseus wasn't born into abstraction. He was born into a specific, documented, archaeologically verifiable world. And understanding that world changes everything about how you read his story. The Mycenaean civilization that produced Odysseus peaked between roughly 1600 and 1200 BCE. A society of interconnected palace kingdoms spread across mainland Greece, the Aegean Islands, and Crete. These weren't primitive chieftains with mud huts. The Mycenaeans built massive fortification walls, the so-called Cyclopean walls of Mycenaean tyrants, using limestone blocks so enormous that later Greeks assumed only giants could have moved them. They maintained complex administrative systems recorded on clay tablets in Linear B, the earliest known written form of Greek. They traded across the entire Mediterranean, from Egypt to Italy. Ithaca, Odysseus's island, sits off the western coast of Greece in the Ionian Sea, and archaeologists have now identified a network of 7 or 8 Mycenaean sites in its northern region that collectively match Homer's description of a significant Bronze Age urban center. The most recent excavations at the site, known as Homer's School, the Agios Athanasios complex, revealed a monumental underground cistern built with core-belled masonry during the Mycenaean palatial period. The engineering sophistication required to construct it on an island of Ithaca's size points to a ruling elite with real administrative power, real wealth, and real architectural ambition. Homer describes Odysseus using 2 different words for king interchangeably, Anax and Basileus. Scholars have noted that Anax is purely Mycenaean. It appears repeatedly in Linear B tablets, while Basileus belongs to a later period. Homer preserved both because the oral tradition preserved both, layering time periods the way geology layers rock. What we're reading in the Odyssey is not pure invention. It is the sediment of a civilization that actually existed, with its palace economies, its livestock registers, its ship manifests, and its elaborate system of royal obligation. Odysseus would have ruled from a megaron, the central hall of a Mycenaean palace, with a great circular hearth at the center, painted columns and frescoed walls. Around him, an administrative apparatus managed the kingdom's pigs, goats, sheep, and cattle. The wealth of Mycenaean kings was fundamentally measured in livestock, confirmed by both the Linear B tablets and Homer's own text, which introduces Odysseus's household through 3 key figures: Eumaeus the swineherd, Melanthius the goatherd, and Philoetius the cowherd. This was the world Odysseus was born to govern, and it was a world that expected its king to be something very specific: Achilles had speed and the rage that comes from divine blood. Ajax had strength so absolute that no man in the Greek army could match him shield to shield. Agamemnon had the authority of command, the largest fleet, the most men, the political weight of the King of Kings. Odysseus had metis, the word which became his defining epithet. Polytropos, the man of many turns, is one of the most loaded terms in ancient Greek. It means cunning intelligence, practical wisdom, the ability to read a situation, flip it, and extract an outcome that raw power would never have produced. It is the intelligence of the sailor who reads the wind before it changes direction, the diplomat who says exactly what needs to be said to the person who most needs to hear it, the survivor who improvises when the plan dissolves. And the Greeks treated this quality with something close to reverence, which makes Odysseus unique among the great heroes of the Bronze Age. Where Achilles refuses to bend and dies young and glorious, Odysseus bends constantly, adapts constantly, survives constantly, and reaches old age in his own bed, in his own kingdom, with his own wife beside him. Homer is making an argument about what kind of intelligence the world actually rewards, and it is not Achilles' argument. The most famous demonstration of Odysseus' metis is also the most elegantly constructed double meaning in ancient literature. Trapped in the Cyclops Polyphemus' cave, Odysseus introduces himself as nobody, utis in Greek. When he blinds the Cyclops and the neighboring giants ask Polyphemus who hurt him, he cries, "Nobody is killing me," and they leave. But the Greek text plays a deeper trick. Metis, the alternative spelling, means cunning. Polyphemus is simultaneously saying, "Nobody is killing me," and "cunning is killing me." The hero's weapon and his name are the same word. What did this look like in practice, in the Bronze Age world that formed Odysseus? It meant a king who solved the political problem of Helen's suitors by designing the oath of mutual protection that created the Greek alliance against Troy. It meant a warrior who designed the Trojan horse, not a general's blunt assault, but a craftsman's patience and an actor's discipline. It meant a man who, upon returning home after 20 years, disguised himself as a beggar and spent days reading his own household, testing loyalty, mapping his enemy's positions, planning an ambush in the one room where he held a decisive advantage, before revealing himself. Metis wasn't just a personality trait. In the Mycenaean world, it was a survival strategy at the highest level. Think about the double meaning of nobody. Odysseus built his escape around a wordplay that operated on two levels simultaneously. What do you think is the greatest example of clever thinking in the Odyssey? Drop it in the comments. I want to see what story lands hardest for you. Here is something that most modern readers miss entirely about the Odyssey. It is not primarily a story about monsters. It is primarily a story about hospitality and what happens when it fails. Xenia, the Greek concept of guest friendship, was not a social nicety in Bronze Age and archaic Greece. It was a sacred obligation enforced by Zeus himself, who bore the title Zeus Xenius, Zeus the protector of guests. The rules were precise and inviolable. When a stranger arrives at your door, you feed them, you offer them a bath, you provide comfortable lodging, all before you ask their name. Only after these obligations are fulfilled do you ask who they are and where they come from. The entire architecture of the Odyssey is built on this principle. Every major encounter Odysseus has can be read as a test of Xenia, and the moral judgment of the story falls on whether Xenia is honored or violated. The Cyclops Polyphemus is the most obvious case. When Odysseus and his men enter the cave seeking hospitality, which Odysseus explicitly expects because it is his right as a guest, Polyphemus responds by eating them. This isn't just violence. In the ancient Greek moral framework, it is a cosmic crime. The punishment Odysseus inflicts is not mere revenge. It is the enforcement of divine law. King Alcinous of the Phaeacians represents the opposite extreme, perfect Xenia. He offers Odysseus food, a bath, and fresh clothing before he even asks the stranger's name. He organizes games and feasts in his honor. He listens to 20 years of stories without interrupting. He then equips a magical ship and loads it with treasure to carry Odysseus home. The gift of passage home is the ultimate expression of Xenia taken to its logical limit. Back in Ithaca, the suitors represent the catastrophic violation of Xenia from the other direction. They are guests who have turned into occupiers, consuming Odysseus's food, drinking his wine, courting his wife, threatening his son, for years. They are not strangers whose virtue is being tested. They are a case study in what happens to a society when Xenia collapses entirely. Odysseus's entire strategy upon returning home is structured around Xenia as a diagnostic tool. He arrives disguised as a beggar. The way each person in his household treats this stranger reveals their true character. And Eumaeus the swineherd, a slave, extends perfect hospitality to someone he believes is a penniless wanderer. The suitors insult and physically abuse the same beggar. These responses determine who lives and who doesn't when Odysseus finally picks up his bow. For Odysseus, Xenia wasn't a concept he talked about. It was an operational system he deployed. Odysseus is, before anything else, a sailor. And the sailing world of 1200 BCE was a fundamentally different proposition from anything modern technology has made navigation into. Mycenaean ships were built without the ability to sail against the wind. They depended entirely on oar power when winds were unfavorable, and on favorable winds when sailing. The vessels described in the Odyssey, 50-oared galleys, match the Mycenaean ship types identified in archaeological and iconographic sources. Long, narrow, low in the water, built for speed and coastal raiding rather than open ocean cargo. The linear B tablets at Pylos record hundreds of rowers by name and district, suggesting a maritime infrastructure of genuine organizational complexity. Navigation across the Aegean and the wider Mediterranean in this period was done by dead reckoning, calculating position from known speed, direction, and elapsed time, combined with celestial observation. Sailors read the stars, the current patterns, the behavior of birds, the color and smell of the water, the direction of swells. This was not primitive intuition. It was accumulated empirical knowledge that required years to master and was typically transmitted within families or professional communities over generations. Homer's descriptions of Odysseus at sea are technically plausible in ways that continue to impress nautical historians. When Calypso finally instructs him to build a raft and sail home, she gives him specific celestial navigation instructions. Keep the Pleiades on his left, Bodas setting on his right, and Orion ahead. These are accurate late Bronze Age navigational bearings for sailing eastward across the Mediterranean from the western islands toward Greece. The 10 years of wandering, read through a modern maritime lens, are not entirely fantastical. The Mediterranean's seasonal wind patterns could strand even experienced sailors for extended periods. The straits between islands, the unpredictable behavior of local weather systems, the challenge of navigating at night or in fog. These were genuine hazards that extended voyages dramatically. Ancient sailors generally preferred to hug coastlines and hop between known ports rather than cross open water. When Odysseus is blown off course, he enters territory where these navigational landmarks and safe harbors don't exist, which is precisely the metaphysical point Homer's making. The sea in Odysseus's world was not an obstacle between places. It was a dimension of existence, beautiful, lethal, and entirely indifferent to intention or skill. The Nostos, the homecoming, is the entire point. But understanding what Odysseus was coming home to requires understanding what home actually meant in the Bronze Age world he inhabited. For a Mycenaean king, the oikos, the household, was not just a domestic arrangement. It was the fundamental unit of political and economic power. The palace was simultaneously a residence, an administrative center, a religious site, and a production hub. Everything Odysseus owns, his livestock, his land, his servants, his ships, his weapons, flows through and from the household. When the suitors invade it and begin consuming its resources, they are not just being rude house guests. They are systematically dismantling the material foundation of Odysseus's kingdom. Penelope's role in the Odyssey is frequently underestimated by readers who see her primarily as the faithful wife-waiting. But within the Bronze Age social framework, she is exercising genuine political authority under impossible conditions. For 20 years, for she has been managing a kingdom with no male ruler, surrounded by over 100 armed men who want to marry her and seize the throne. Her famous stratagem, weaving a shroud for Laertes by day and unraveling it by night to delay the suitors, is not just a touching symbol of loyalty. It is a 3-year exercise in political delay tactics that kept her kingdom intact until her husband could return. Telemachus, Odysseus' son, just a baby when his father sailed for Troy, is 19 when the Odyssey begins. His coming-of-age journey through the Odyssey mirrors his father's in compressed form. He travels, encounters different leaders, observes different models of kingship, and returns home ready to fight alongside Odysseus for what belongs to them. And this parallel structure is Homer's way of showing that the Mycenaean conception of kingship was dynastic and inherited, not earned once, but reproduced across generations through the same qualities. And then there is the final test. After 20 years, Odysseus must prove to Penelope that he is genuinely who he claims to be. Not through the scar on his leg that the nurse recognized, not through the slaughter of the suitors that she slept through, but through a private piece of information only the two of them could share. The construction secret of their marriage bed, built around a living olive tree. Penelope tests the man who has passed every other test the world could design by applying the one test no imposter could survive: the intimate knowledge of a life built together. In the Bronze Age world of Mycenaean Greece, Gnostos was never just about geography. It was about the specific, irreplaceable knowledge of who you were before the world tried to make you someone else. 3,000 years after the stories were first told, archaeologists on Ithaca are still finding his name carved in stone. Pilgrims were visiting his sanctuary for over 1,000 years after the Bronze Age ended. A civilization rose, peaked, collapsed, gave way to dark ages, and then centuries later, people were still sailing to Ithaca to leave offerings for a king whose palace may still be buried under the hillside. Odysseus wasn't just a story the ancient Greeks told. He was a value system they worshipped. The proof that Metis, cunning, adaptable, practical intelligence, could outfox divine power. That Xenia, the sacred bond between host and guest, was the foundation of civilization itself. That Gnostos, the hunger for home, was not weakness, but the deepest expression of what makes human beings human. The Cyclops wasn't real. The sirens weren't real. Calypso's island wasn't real. But the world that needed those stories to make sense of itself, that world was very, very real. If this video changed how you think about a story you thought you already knew, drop a like, share it with someone who loves history and mythology, and click the next video on your screen. It was chosen specifically for people who made it all the way to the end of this one.